This presentation is about the research conducted on the readiness of CSPs in Ireland for the EU CS candidate scheme. Cybercrime has always been an issue for organizations and state security colleges and national services have been impacted by highly disruptive cyber attacks early this year. In 2021, ransomware attacks disrupted for weeks the operations of the National College of Ireland and the health services. Global losses from cybercrime total over 1 trillion in 2020 and is expected to increase significantly in the coming years unless appropriate safeguards are put in place. Governments are responding to the issue, and within the EU, the Cybersecurity Act came into force, laying out a base of requirements for cybersecurity certifications of ICT products, services, and processes. The Cybersecurity Act also generally defines the roles of each stakeholder involved in the cybersecurity certification framework. As part of the development of the framework, ENISA issues candidate schemes upon request from the EU Commission for specific ICT systems, such as cloud. These are the stakeholders involved in the EU cybersecurity certification framework. The NCCA is the authority managing the certification processes nationally and communicates back with ENISA at the EU level. The CAB is the body that audits ICT products, services, and processes and issues certificates. The testing lab assists the CSP for technical assessments. The NAB is the body that provides accreditations for the CAB and NCCAs. As part of the EU cybersecurity certification framework, the EU Commission conducts a series of projects to build capabilities for cybersecurity certification in EU member countries. One of these projects is the A4SEF project that involves stakeholders from France, Cyprus, and Ireland. The National Standards Authority of Ireland, NSAI, is involved as a conformity assessment body in the process of establishing a cybersecurity certification ecosystem for the cybersecurity certification of cloud services in Ireland, based on the EU Cloud Services Scheme developed by ENISA. The EU Commission has indicated that cybersecurity schemes will be mandated for certain products and services before the end of 2023. Furthermore, according to the new rules, products and services vendors in the EU will be required to certify their services a single time before placing on EU market. As the Cybersecurity Act and EU CS scheme are new in the industry, it is likely that CSPs are not aware of it. To minimize cost and time during pilot certifications, it is important to raise awareness among CSPs with regards to the new cybersecurity certification scheme. It is also important for authorities involved in the process to understand the readiness status of the industry with regards to the new certification scheme, to inform their communication strategies and engagement strategies efficiently. This raises the questions how to measure that readiness and what is the domain that they are mature in and what is the domain they need improvements in. These results the results of this research provides a lot of benefits for CSPs and other stakeholders. The CSPs are going to learn about the CSPs learned about the requirements of the EU CS, prepared in taking part in certification in the future term, and got an understanding of the gaps in their security implementations and guidance for improvement. All of this eventually leads to being successfully certified the first time when they apply. The results of this study will also inform policymakers and authorities in their engagement strategies with the industry. This study follows several peer-reviewed work on readiness assessment published in the last decade. While there is a lack of specific work with regards to assessing the readiness of an industry sector to undertake a certain certification, the literature review focused on readiness assessment and compliance readiness frameworks models for information systems. Researchers have developed readiness assessment frameworks and models based on a set of domains that encompass the requirements against which organizations are assessed. Certain researchers reviewed the previous literature to understand the factors affecting the readiness of organizations in the sector of the industry. These factors were then used as domains in their framework to assess the readiness of organizations. Other researchers have based their models on previous frameworks, adjusting them to current environments and standards. For example, Ali developed a model to assess the security readiness of organizations based on employee cybersecurity readiness to respond to cybersecurity threats and attacks, while Noor Iliani and al. Developed a cloud security readiness model based on two frameworks, the TOE, Technology Organization Environment Framework, and the 6-layer framework. The TOE framework, the TOE framework, is generally used to examine technological and environmental factors and organization readiness, influencing the organization in the adoption or improvement of new technologies. The second framework is used to assess the readiness of organizations with regards to information security based on ISO 27001. To assess the readiness of CSPs, the authors developed their model based on the previous frameworks, replacing ISO 27001 with ISO 27017, which is the international standard for cloud security. The methodology is based on the cloud security readiness domains. These are the factors that affect the readiness and compliance of organizations. The requirements of the EU-CS scheme were mapped to each of the CSR domains. Subsequently, survey questions were drafted for a CSR domain based on requirements present in each domain. It is necessary to point out that all the requirements were not included in the questionnaire, as it is a new scheme and it is probable that CSPs are unaware of specific terms used in its context. The answers expected for the questionnaire are yes, no, and non-applicable. These answers were used to determine a readiness score in each CSR domain. The overall score is the average of the scores. The mapping, the questionnaire, and score calculation methodology have been reviewed by a cloud security industry expert. Feedback was considered for each of the elements of the framework, and the questionnaire was circulated to pre-selected CSP for testing purposes. The responses were used to answer the previous questions. The means of all factors have been calculated. The mean of the overall scores was used to determine the answer to the average scores of the sample of CSP selected for the study. The factor that scored higher was determined by the highest mean value across all factors. Similarly, the factor that scored lower was determined by the lower mean value. This study extends the CSR model developed by Noor Iliani et al., as discussed in the literature review. This model is based on the domains technology, organization, policy, stakeholder, culture, knowledge, and environment that affects the readiness and compliance of organizations. The requirements of the EU-CS were mapped to these domains, and the questionnaire was developed based on the requirements in each domain. These elements were collated in an Excel workbook and sent for review by a cloud security expert who provided feedback. The workbook was protected and circulated across 27 CSPs. 5 provided responses, achieving a response rate of 18.5. Follow-up calls were then arranged to discuss the results of each CSP. The results were presented as shown on the screen. After a CSP filled the questionnaire, the scores per domain and readiness level are provided. For this particular CSP, the scores are between 3 and 4 for technology, organization, and policy domains, and 4 for environment, knowledge, culture, and stakeholder domains. With these scores, the CSP achieved readiness level of likely high. This means that the CSP likely meets more than 70% of the requirements of the EU-CS scheme. The Excel sheet workbook developed assessed the readiness of CSPs. The sheets have been protected to preserve the integrity of the document, as you can see down here. The first tab is the introduction, where CSPs can find instructions, definitions, and acronyms. There is also a disclaimer about the approximative readiness level provided and the fact that the requirements of the EU-CS might be slightly amended in the future. The second tab presents the mapping of the CSR domain and the EU-CS requirements. The domains have been color-coded for user-friendliness purposes. This way, if a CSP sees a color changing in the long sheet, they will know that this is a different domain. The next tab provides the details about each requirement as to what must be done. Clearly, it also provides priorities for implementation of additional compensatory controls to improve the overall security posture. The priorities are based on assurance level, basic, high, and substantial, as defined in the EU-CS scheme. These requirements have been used to draft the assessment questions. The options yes, no, non-applicable are available here in the drop-down. And a rational column is provided for each NA response. So if we fill it out and check out the results, we'll see individual readiness scores showing and the overall readiness level. Okay. Yeah, as you can see here, so the more yes we have, the better. We expect CSPs to answer yes to all these questions. Okay, so yeah, here we can see how the score changes and the recommendations uh, are available in the previous sheet as well. Descriptive statistic on the sample highlights that the environment domain has a constant value of 4. It is the highest value that can be scored. This shows that all CSP likely fulfill more than 75% of the requirements of the EU CS environmental security. It is also important to note that the knowledge domain scored the highest minimal value of 2.6, while the culture domain scored the lowest minimal value across all domains, which is 0. Furthermore, the means of all domains remain between 3 and 4. This shows that after environment domain, that is of value 4, the knowledge domain is the second domain where the CSP scored higher. Also, the culture domain is the domain that scored lower in terms of readiness across the sample of CSPs. The environment domain focuses on logical and physical security, and the knowledge domain focuses on documentation, while culture domain addresses incident response. This shows that the sample of CSPs are mature in physical and logical environmental security and documentation, while they need to improve their incident response posture. Since they are all ISO 27001 certified, it also highlights that the international standard might need certain adjustments with regards to incident response controls and guidance. The research was conducted around determining the readiness level of CSPs in Ireland with regards to the new EU cybersecurity certification scheme for cloud services. The EU CS scheme was determined in 2 phases, determining the readiness of CSPs individually, then collectively. The CSR model domains used to determine the CSP readiness level individually is based on the TOE framework used to assess the readiness of organizations with regard to certain criteria, and the 6-layer framework used to assess the compliance of organization mapped against a set of requirements. In the context of this study, the requirements the requirements are from the EU CS scheme. These domains are assessed based on a survey aiming to provide readiness scores of the CSP in each domain. The selected CSP were contacted to participate in the research, expected to provide yes, no, and non-applicable type answers to the questionnaire. These answers were associated with values to determine the score for each domain, which contributed to determining the overall readiness level of the CSP. The scores of each CSR domain and overall readiness level of CSPs were used to calculate the collective readiness level of the sample of CSPs. The results showed that these CSPs are likely ready to take part in the EU CS scheme certification. However, as the readiness assessment methodology is performed before the scheme has come into force, certain requirements have not been considered in the scope of the EU CS questionnaire. As such, the assessment provides an approximate readiness level. Furthermore, the assessment is limited to identifying the EU CS requirements met by CSPs instead of assessing the level of suitability of their security implementation as it is done during a certification assessment. Also, the sample used to determine the collective readiness level only involves ISO 27001 certified small SMEs, and its size is not representative of the cloud market in Ireland. Further improvements include updating the questionnaire to include the future guidance that the EU CS scheme will provide for certifications, extend the assessment to audits, and include a larger and diverse number of participants in the evaluation. This will provide results that are representative of the Irish market. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?